Hello everyone, welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where on Wednesdays we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. Today's Woodblock Wednesday is dedicated to Oda Kazuma and a really striking Sosaku Hanga style print. Oda is known as a very versatile artist. He worked in both Shin Hanga and Sosaku Hanga paradigms. And when I say Shin Hanga, I mean that he was hired by a publisher to produce a design, and that publisher then had a woodblock carver or carvers create the blocks for the design and then printers to execute the printing. And so that is the Shinhanga paradigm. It's a collaborative process. The publisher that he worked with the most in terms of Shinhanga was Watanabe, and of course he was the one that started the movement. However, Oda's body of work is extensive. He produced hundreds of designs, and 95%, maybe even 98%, are actually done in the Sosaku Hanga tradition, meaning that he was exclusively involved in the printmaking or the production of his prints. He created the design, he then produced the actual print by carving blocks or working with an etching plate or lithography and then printing the pieces himself. And today's work is one of those pieces done in the Sosaku Hanga tradition. I think it's a really striking work and a wonderful piece to discuss for today's episode. So without further ado, let's go to the table and see what I have. All right, here we have a work by Oda Kazuma. It's a lithograph from 1949. The work is known by the title Mount Jodo and Mt. Tate. The work is quite rare, in fact. One of the reasons why I wanted to feature it here is because you probably haven't seen it, and chances are you probably won't again. The edition is 8 out of 10. It has actually a collector's seal here, so that's not an artist seal. I just wanted to point that out. The signature of the artist and the date are at the bottom right. Now, you look at this work, and at first blush, you might think it's a watercolor or a woodblock print. There's really wonderful atmospheric quality to the design, and that is something that woodblock prints are celebrated over the world for. That's just a quality that's sort of inherent in the woodblock printmaking process, this really wonderful sort of atmospheric quality you get in prints. Well, Oda, being a woodblock print artist, understood that characteristic in prints as something that was highly desirable, and he was able to translate that into lithography. And for a very large period of time, I'd say that Oda was considered Japan's premier lithographer. Lithography was imported into Japan during the Meiji period, and it was used as a cheaper means of reproductions, much cheaper than actually producing woodblock prints or other processes that would produce an image in a newspaper or in a publication. Here, lithography could be used on a larger scale to produce hundreds, if not thousands, of images for various reasons. But in this case, Oda uses lithography, much like the European artists that we always associate with lithography. There's posters of Miro, Picasso, Matisse, and others, even up early in the late 1800s with French posters, with Toulouse-Lautrec. All of those works were obviously produced as posters, and it's sort of the same process with lithography. And so he uses this technique, but he's able to produce wonderful effects. And so if we think about the pieces that Toulouse-Lautrec produced or other artists of the period, they look very different. And so here we have subtleties of shading that are really well executed throughout the composition. Again, if you didn't know this was a litho, you would swear it was a woodblock print. Now, of course, there's some telltale signs that tell us it's a litho. When you come closer to examine the piece here, I'll pull this off from this backing sheet. The paper is much thicker, and the background, there's no bleed through. You don't see bleed through with lithography because the paper is so much thicker and the pigments don't bleed into the paper. The process won't allow that. The pigments lay flat on the surface of the paper. But because that is the process in lithography, Oda Kazuma exploits that, and he adds a very rich quality to the surface of the paper. And so you see these pigments. And I'm going to zoom in. You could look at that shading. And that is all resting entirely on the surface of the paper. And that's how those colors are so rich. Now, the subject, this is a mountain range that is in Toyama. And if you're familiar with Japanese geography, Toyama is an area where they get tons of snow. You might see images every winter where there's, people that are like walking around and the snow towers over them. Well, that's the same region. And here, I could imagine that Oda has visited this area many times, done some sketching and admired the mountains. And they're very majestic with snow. But in this case, he shows them in spring as the snows are receding, and you get that foggy quality as the snow melts and the water goes into the atmosphere and creates the clouds. You get that feeling, and I mean, I think it's wonderful. He nailed it. A lot of people look at lithography as a way to reproduce images for the purpose of illustrations. And, certainly any artistic process could be used in a more mechanical, mass-produced sort of way. But in this case, we really get a sense of the artistry and the possibilities for this medium. And Oda Kazuma, being one of Japan's most important lithographers, certainly proves what is possible in this medium. And again, I want to reiterate, this print was produced entirely by the artist, from the conception to the production of this impression. And it was done in a very small edition, which you expect from Sosaku-hanga artists. What is interesting, I think, is that usually Sosaku-hanga artists produced only a handful of prints because there was almost no market for them. And this was during the pre-war period. And so, if you're a Sosaku-hanga collector, you know very well how rare early Sosaku-hanga prints are. You just can't find them because most of those artists were not professional artists. They weren't producing work in large quantities, unlike their Shinhanga counterparts, where they were just Watanabe, Doi, and other publishers, as well as artists who self-published like Yoshida. They were churning out impressions by the thousands and thousands and thousands. These prints were not. And after the war, Oda continued with creating work in low numbers. And I think he was just taking cues from the West. And he realized that the desirability of artwork is also somewhat centered on the edition, how many pieces there are. Of course, design is important, and what design the artist produces and how compelling it is probably the number one aspect or variable in how a print is judged, beyond who does it, of course, and who the artist is, I mean. But in this case, Oda continued that tradition of making prints in low numbers well after the war. And the people who were purchasing these prints were Westerners. And so though this print has a Japanese collector seal, which I've seen many times, this seal has been on various very important Shinhanga and Sosakuhanga prints. And so this collector was a very astute collector, and was quite wise to have picked up this print. But I just want to emphasize that the market for prints in Japan after the war exploded. It was just phenomenal. Artists who wish they could be professionals became professionals, in some cases overnight, because there was such a demand for Japanese prints. And Oda understood the demand was there, but instead of producing vast amounts of impressions, he just worked on design, and he made many prints. So his body of work numbers in the hundreds, maybe 200 to 300 prints. And so, but within that number, what you have are some very rare works, which I think is very neat in terms of collecting Oda's work. So I'm going to zoom in and just let you admire the surface and the design. I often highlight reference books that help us understand the work that we're discussing. And there's 3 reference books on Oda Kazuma's work, but the main one is this reference here. And these all illustrate Oda Kazuma's work in both Shinhanga and Sosakuhanga styles. This one, though, I would say is the best one because there's never a catalog that's complete, but this one does the best job to highlight both Oda's prints as well as watercolors, and he also experimented in oils. Like all artists of the 20th century, they all went to art school, studied painting as part of the curriculum. But of course, Oda being such a fantastic print artist, primarily focused on printing Japan's top designs of the 20th century. But yeah, you do see occasionally some wonderful watercolors that come up for sale, and they're very charming. I will say about those watercolors, they seem to be more sort of idyllic, almost touristy visions of Japan, whereas Oda's work in print form, he really focused on the city and the aspects of the city that were much more modern. And so I suspect that he sold those watercolors more to make ends meet and make a living to supplement his income as a print artist. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me on this week's installment of Woodblock Wednesday, where we examined a very rare Sosakuhanga work by Oda Kazuma, who is known both as a lithographer and a woodblock print artist. I have other Oda Kazuma pieces. I often carry his work. I'm a great admirer of his work, and I try to stock it when I can, but I really look out for the best quality impressions as well as designs. So when I sell out, it takes me a little bit to find pieces, but this work is available. It's on my website, collectingjapaneseprints.com. And of course, I have a bookstore online as well on my website. And I invite all of you, feel free to have a look and see what I have available. Most of the reference books are long out of print, rare books on Japanese woodblock prints and paintings. So I want to thank all of you. Thank you for joining me on this week's installment, and I look forward to seeing you next week.